Now, whenever a luxury car maker introduces a new car to our market, normally the first batch of cars is fully imported and then they slowly transition to full local assembly. And that was the case with this generation C-Class, where the first batch were fully imported from Germany, and now this particular model is locally assembled in Pekan, Pahang. Now, in that process, the C-Class has dropped between 12 or in this case 17,000 ringgit compared to its fully imported compatriot. However, there have been a couple of updates in here, but most importantly, the biggest question in everybody's mind is, has this car lost any quality in that transition from foreign assembly to local assembly? Well, we've spent the last 4 days with this car and we are now prepared to tell you. But before we do so, be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell so you're notified every time we make a new upload. But ladies and gentlemen, this is our review of the Mercedes-Benz C300 AMG-Line. One of the most significant updates to this generation C-Class is the engine. So the C300 now runs a new generation 2-litre 4-cylinder engine, turbocharged naturally, with a 48-volt mild hybrid system. Outputs on this engine are pretty healthy with a peak torque number of 400 Newton meters. Plus, with that 48-volt mild hybrid system, it means that starting off from a standstill is now smoother and less strenuous on the engine, improving fuel consumption. Now that is still paired to a 9G-tronic transmission, which is a 9-speed automatic from Mercedes-Benz with power going to the rear wheels. The other significant upgrade obviously is in terms of styling, with this generation C-Class now looking even more menacing and even more aggressive than before. Now the C-Class range is actually available in 2 grades, which is the Avant-Garde for the C200 and this, which is the AMG line, exclusive for the C300. Now as part of that AMG line, it means that you get a downturned trapezoidal grille up front, replete with chrome pins in the Mercedes-Benz TriStar fashion. Now initially I thought that looked a little bit gaudy, but over time I've come to kind of appreciate the way it looks, and because it's a satinized silver, it's not as in your face as the chrome pins from the previous generation. And obviously because it's an AMG line, you also get a more aggressive front bumper. Now talking about the headlights that flank this enormous grille, these are the LED high performance units which are shared between the C200 and C300. These lights now also offer active high beam, where they will automatically dip the beam should it detect another vehicle. What's worth noting, however, is that the previous generation C-Class actually came with the multi-beam LED units, which meant that they were able to provide an adaptive beam depending on driving conditions. And the fact that we now only get the LED high-performance units mean that it is technically a spec downgrade. Now moving down the side, we get 19-inch multi-spoke AMG alloy wheels, which look absolutely fantastic. You get a diamond cut finish along the front, and these are wrapped in Goodyear Eagle F1 tires, which are made specifically for this car. As a result, you get excellent grip and excellent NVH levels. Now moving down the side, you will see that the new C-Class builds upon the previous generation, where you have this nice, slowly, gently tapering roofline and a very short, pert boot. This sort of proportion is actually very classic, although it's just been reinterpreted for newer generation models. I quite appreciate the fact that this car has the satin chrome accents around the windows and the nice little bit of chrome on top of the door handles, because again, this is the AMG line, you get a nice little side skirt which helps you visually lower the car and allow the car to hunker down. Now talking about hunkering down, this particular AMG line car runs on specific suspension, and as a result it does ride a little bit low. This is worth noting because on most speed bumps you will find that the car will either scrape its nose or it will scrape down the middle. And even worse, when you have slightly worse designed parking garages like the one in my condo, unless you attack the ramp at an angle, you are going to scrape that front end. This is worth noting because as I drove this car through Keddy Hills, it did protest a couple of times over the speed bumps. Now, if A vehicle like this can't live in Kenny Hills, which I would imagine is its natural habitat. Where is it supposed to live? Now, the rear of the C-Class also sees a very significant redesign over the outgoing model. Gone are the single-piece taillights, now replaced with two-piece taillights that bleed into the boot lid. You also get a couple of fake chrome exhausts at the bottom because the actual exhausts in this car point downwards, but you do get a little bit of chrome that goes all the way across to emphasize the width of this car. Now, talking about the rear very specifically, Mercedes-Benz is doing this Russian doll thing where every one of their cars look the same. Now, the C-Class in particular looks a little bit too similar to me like the A-Class Saloon. Now, looking like an S-Class would be fine, but looking like a more affordable model, not so much. Now, one thing this car does have over the A-Class Saloon is a powered tailgate, behind which hides an enormous amount of space. Now, this is not only a big boot, but it's also very intelligently designed because there is actually space underneath the floor for smaller items. You do also get nets on either side to hide more things. You get hooks up here to hold grocery bags, and you also get switches back here that allow you to fold the rear seats should you require more space. Now, when you do fold those rear seats, you will find that there is a little bit of a step, but at least that step is covered in plastic, which means it's relatively easy for you to still attempt to glide things to the front, but it's still a step nonetheless. Now, I do appreciate, again, given that this car has an electric tailgate, it also has a kick to open function, which makes life a little bit easier, but I'm not going to demonstrate that because you guys just laugh when it doesn't work the first time. And as far as I'm concerned, it seems that Mercedes-Benz has been very thoughtful with the way this car has been redesigned for the current generation. The C-Class is ultimately Mercedes-Benz's #1 model in history, with over 10 million of these cars sold across the globe since it was first introduced as the 190. And so with that care, we'll see if that exterior care has been extended into the interior. And at first glance, it certainly seems like that's been the case because this interior is really nice. So now Mercedes-Benz has a dual tier sort of dash design where on the top you get the instrument cluster, you get the aircon vents, and it's then split by this nice piece of silver trim to this fake carbon weave, beneath which sits this enormous portrait-style touchscreen. Now, this is the latest iteration of Mercedes-Benz's MBUX system, and it's now done away with the rotary knob and the little shortcut buttons that you got in the middle. In its place, you now get more space in here, like a wireless phone charger, and you also get a USB-C port to plug your phone in. You get a couple of cup holders, and conveniently a place for me to put my sunglasses because there is no space up here because it's all taken up by this panoramic sunroof. Now, in terms of operation, I quite liked the previous MBUX system because it was very easy to use. Between the rotary knob as well as the touchpad on the steering wheel, it meant that it was very easy to manipulate the system. Now, you still have the touchpad and it does do some things on this center screen, but its operations are rather limited, which means the majority of the time you are going to be pressing the screen. Now, mercifully, when you're sat here properly, this screen is set up in such a way that it's very easy for you to navigate throughout the whole thing. I never have to really stretch in order to reach the furthest corner. And mercifully, as part of this new MBUX system, you get a fixed panel on the bottom for the climate controls, which means that it's very easy to manipulate, although I still would have preferred buttons and knobs. Now, in terms of the usability, it's got a fantastic processor, which means everything runs really quickly, and it does come with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which pairs very nicely given the fact this car comes with a wireless charger. Now, this is not the only screen in here because obviously there is a digital instrument cluster up ahead. It's no longer hidden within a cowl, it sits sort of free, a bit like the Mercedes-Benz A-Class range, and the graphics and usability remain incredibly good. It's relatively intuitive, you do get a decent amount of customizability. It's arguably better than what you get from Audis these days in terms of what you can do on that screen, and I certainly appreciate it. And of course, this being the instrument cluster, it means it's obviously not a touchscreen, which is great because this screen is now covered in grubby fingerprints, which I cannot stand. And to that end, I also appreciate the fact that even though this is fake carbon fiber, at the very least it doesn't show fingerprints as much as piano black would have. And I know that Mercedes-Benz really wanted to use piano black because they have on the doors. Now, in terms of cubby spaces, you get a relatively large armrest in here with a couple of USB-C ports. You have those cup holders that I mentioned earlier, bottle holders in the doors, and a decent amount of space in the door pockets themselves. You get a relatively shallow glove box, but it does go quite deep, which means you can hide a few things, including, in this case, quite a number of masks. And overall, it is a nice place to be. This being the C300 AMG-Line, you get an AMG-Line steering wheel, which is slightly fatter, and you get a different design for the spokes, which I think are very intricate. And although they certainly look very nice, operations are not that great because this is still ultimately a touch-based system. While they are button press in order to activate and so on, they are still touch sensitive, and that is particularly irritating when you're trying to adjust the volume on the stereo because it's either very loud or completely muted. It's very difficult to get anything in between. But other than that, adjustments are made relatively easily. You do get metal pedal shifters, which is always very nice to use, and these seats are incredibly comfortable. They are Outto, which could be better, but you know what, at least you do get electric adjustment with 3-stage memory on either side, which is very nice. You do not, however, get a heater or a ventilator, and the ventilation system would be quite nice in the Malaysian car, particularly given the fact that you have a panoramic sunroof, which I always forget to close when I park outside. In terms of quality, everything here feels quite nice. You get Outto up here on the dash, you get Outto up here on the doors with some nice stitching, again to emphasize the quality of this car. However, being a C-Class and being rather typical of Mercedes-Benz, when you reach beneath is where you start feeling the slightly more affordable plastics. And the fact that it's not as low as I would expect to find it is a little irritating, because if this was sort of down here, then that would be fine. But when I drive, especially when I'm stuck in traffic, I do quite like to tap on the center console, and that revealed that this is a little bit low rent. But that low rent feel does not extend to the rear of the C-Class, at least not beyond this nasty plastic on the center console. Because back here you still get the same Outto, you still get the same nice sort of floating metal armrest here, which all looks really nice. And you can see that there is some more ambient lighting around here and around here, again, to sort of raise the ambient feeling, atmosphere back here, which I quite like. You also get a couple of rear aircon vents, however, these are the slightly more affordable black plastic ones, and so you don't, more importantly, get ambient lighting in here, but as aircon vents they function, and that's ultimately what you want. Now what you don't get back here are USB ports, which I find a little bit strange. They're not down here, they're not in here, they're certainly also not in here, because this merely hides a phone holder or a couple of cup holders. And I find that, again, really odd, because the C-Class is favored by young, smaller families, and I would imagine that children would like to keep their devices charged up over a longer journey. They do, however, come with rear sun blinds, which means that if you do have children mounted in the ISOFIX mounts that are back here, you can shield them a little bit from the UV rays. And for rear-facing child seats, these doors do open quite wide, and with this seat set in my driving position, there is certainly plenty of space to mount a seat, and they can enjoy the view from the panoramic sunroof. Now, it is worth noting that in terms of space, the new C-Class is a much larger vehicle than before, which is why with this seat set up the way it is, I have acres of knee room and I've got a good amount of footroom. Headroom, however, is a little bit compromised because of the panoramic sunroof. You can now turn this into a drinking game at this point, but for the average Malaysian, there should be plenty in here. You do get some aircraft style pockets, which I quite like that. Now, in terms of the practicality, again, you've got cup holders here, you've got the door pockets with a bottle holder and a little bit more space back here, but overall, that really is about it. If you want rear entertainment, this is not the car for you, and more importantly, if you want USB ports in the rear, this is also apparently not the car for you. But what if you enjoy driving? Is this finally the C-Class that rewards drivers? Is this now finally the car for you? In short, not really. But we'll talk about the positives first. So as I mentioned earlier, this car's got a mild hybrid system, which is why, sat here at a traffic light, the engine is off and everything is all very quiet. Now, as a result of the mild hybrid system, it means that now starting this car, for example, is very smooth. And on top of that, when you set off from a standstill, progress is done very smoothly without the engine being under too much stress, which has certainly helped to elevate the sense of luxury in the new C-Class. The other thing that Mercedes-Benz has seriously improved on in this car is NVH, or noise, vibration and harshness. Now, the previous generation C-Class, to me at least, was particularly known for being very noisy because there was a lot of road noise, a lot of wind noise, even within sort of urban speed. So naturally, motorway cruising was a lot worse. But in this car, it is significantly better. It could be as a result of those Goodyear tires, or it could just be a result of all the little refinements made to this car in terms of the aerodynamics, the wheels, as well as the noise insulation material, because now the C-Class feels like a proper Mercedes at speed. And at speed is where I feel that the C-Class really excels, because as a result of this new generation model, it is now lower and wider than before, and as a result, it feels a lot more stable, particularly when you're cruising over longer distances, again, doing great speed. And because the steering wheel is very well weighted, it means that you can carry quite a bit of confidence both when you're cruising as well as when you're going through high-speed corners. But even though it is only rear drive, and despite it being very powerful, it's very difficult to unstick this car, even through particularly challenging conditions. This is as a result of, again, that very low center of gravity, as well as the excellent tires, which provide great grip both in the dry and in the wet. The other area where this car has been improved upon is actually in terms of safety, because now the CKD C-Class now comes with Mercedes-Benz pre-safe technology, which means that it has its anticipatory collision avoidance and accident damage mitigation systems. So for example, when the car detects that the AEB might have to come into play, or if it detects that there may be a collision, the first thing it does is it tenses up the seat belts to try and get the occupants in the perfect position, and it will of course warn you about what might be about to happen. And as a result, it does mean that this car is slightly better equipped than not only the generation before it, but also the CBU model, which did not come with pre-save. Now, there are some weak points to this car, however. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this car does give you a sense of confidence when you're driving at higher speed, particularly through corners and so on. The only problem is that it doesn't provide you that confidence with any degree of joy. Now, the Mercedes-Benz historical competitor is the BMW 3 Series, which, especially in this generation, has kind of made a reputation for itself of being particularly dynamic without sacrificing comfort and refinement. But the new C-Class, where it's particularly improved upon in terms of refinement, in terms of dynamics, it remains broadly similar to how it was before, which is competent but uninspiring. Now, of course, there are many different kinds of luxury compact executive saloon buyers out there, some of whom want a car that will inspire them behind the wheel, and others just want a car that's able to make good, comfortable, quiet progress. And to that end, the C-Class is the latter. Definitely, if you want a car within this segment that's a bit better to drive or is slightly more tuned for driving pleasure, then you would be better served with the 3 Series. But for everybody else, the C-Class is perfect because it seems to do everything that it's supposed to very competently. And competence is certainly the way of the game for this car. And the other area that I'd like to touch on, two more actually. The first area I'd like to touch on is in terms of safety. Now, while this car does come with pre-safe, as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately it doesn't come with any other kind of active safety. Sure, it has lane centering and it's got blind spot monitoring, but it doesn't come with adaptive cruise control, which I think is a pretty big omission at this price point. Bear in mind that the C300 AMG-Line goes for well north of 300,000 ringgit, and for this price you can also get the much more powerful all-wheel drive Volvo S60 plug-in hybrid, which also comes with full level 2 semi-autonomy. Now, I mentioned the inclusion of adaptive cruise control, or rather the omission of adaptive cruise control in the C-Class, the inclusion in the Volvo, because adaptive cruise control with stop-and-go functionality is something that really elevates the driving experience, especially to a slightly more premium level. Because traffic jams, admittedly, are where most of us hate driving. And the C-Class has done everything else really well. The sound system in here is great. The infotainment system in this car is great. The driving experience is pretty all right. But I still have to drive myself through traffic jams. And that is a little bit of a shame because, again, the majority of buyers of cars like these will most likely be driving in and out of town, going to work and coming back home, and they are going to be stuck in crawls. And in a crawl, adaptive cruise control with stop and go is worth its weight in gold. And the really irritating thing is the fact that that functionality is available in the E300, not the C300. And worse still is the fact that Mercedes-Benz's level 2 semi-autonomy is really good, which means that had this car been fitted with it, I would have been really enjoying myself, and I'd be able to enjoy myself even more, even when I get stuck in traffic. Now, the last point I'd like to touch on before I sign off is fuel economy. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this car runs a new generation 2-litre 4-cylinder with a mild hybrid system. Now, the previous generation C-Class, and in fact, most Mercedes-Benzes, in my testing, have failed to return particularly remarkable fuel economy. In fact, regardless of which model you go for, it is a struggle to try and get them to do anything less than about 9.5 litres per 100 kilometers, regardless of how highly or lowly tuned the engines might be. The 2-litre 4-cylinders, I mean. However, it seems that the mild hybridization and this new generation engine have done the trick, because on a particularly long run that I did over the weekend, which saw me do about 130 kilometers, which included traffic both ways, mind you, this car managed to return a very respectable 7.1 litres per 100 kilometers. And driving about town, getting stuck in town traffic and driving at town speed, this car will quite happily do between 7.5 and 8.5 litres per 100 kilometers. Now, as a result, it means that this car, which came with a full tank when I picked it up, and I still haven't finished it, has a theoretical range in excess of 800 kilometers on a full tank. And again, that is with relatively aggressive driving. I'm hardly a sedate driver, at least I know I've been described as such. And so I can only imagine that someone with a lighter and more considerate right foot would be able to eke out even greater fuel economy from this engine. That, to me, I think, that and the refinement are the two biggest strengths of the new C-Class. Those are the two biggest areas of major improvement, and I think that any potential buyer of a C-Class will be massively appreciative of these updates. Now, does that mean that I'd recommend a C-Class to someone who's looking to spend in excess of 300,000 ringgit for a compact executive saloon? Definitely. The fact that this car also comes with a 4-year warranty with servicing just makes the entire proposition even sweeter, because a lot of this car's competition do not come with comprehensive warranties, and if you want up to 4 years coverage, well, normally they offer 5, you'll have to end up paying more on top of the RRP. And given the fact this car does have a relatively alright suite of safety systems, albeit without adaptive cruise control and active lane centering, it does mean that this is a car that can do pretty good work as a family hauler. You know, my first Mercedes, which is exactly what the C-Class was envisioned as when it was first introduced as the E, or rather the 190E. However, if you're looking at a car within this category that provides a degree of inspiration behind the wheel, a car that provides true driving joy, then unfortunately this is not it. Simply because Mercedes-Benz has quite rightfully prioritized comfort and refinement in this car, and it's done so really very well. And ultimately, if you want a compact executive saloon that is fantastic to drive, you can always look at the BMW 3 Series, which continues in its current generation to be one of the best handling vehicles on the market. And if you'd like a car to stand out, because ultimately this C-Class will be incredibly popular, and you don't want to blend in a sea of other C-Classes in the corporate car park, I guess you could look at the Audi A5 Sportback, which is available with a Quattro system, although it is a little bit more expensive than this. But as a whole, the new C300 AMG-Line is a much better, much more considered, and much more well-rounded proposition than before. It's a lot easier to recommend. This engine and powertrain is excellent, and I have no doubt that buyers of the C300 AMG-Line will have a wonderful time enjoying themselves in their cars. And with that wraps up our review of the 2023 Mercedes-Benz C300 AMG-Line. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, jangan bodoh.